Okay, so as you can see, electric vehicles have been very successful and around for quite a while. So back in the day, I used to play chess as a kid when we were in school with a guy by the name of Elon Musk. Little did I know that growing up in South Africa, that this guy would actually grow up to be one of the fundamental forces in changing the whole automotive industry. But also, by doing that, also highlighting the seriousness of climate change. And one of the things that is very profound in what's happening at the moment is that the UK has banned all petrol and diesel vehicles from 2040. Only electric vehicles or very low emission vehicles will be allowed to be sold in the UK.
New cars.
Yeah. New vehicles.
Yeah.
So technically petrol and diesel will not be banned, but vehicles with high emissions will be banned, and the science is just not there, or probably will never be there to actually make it within those emissions. So what I want to discuss with you today, three things, is the physics behind climate change. What are the actual physics? What does it all mean? And then I want to concentrate a little bit on renewable energy, where we are in the UK at the moment, and then just to end off, the difference between electric vehicles and ICE, or internal combustion engines. The two different vehicles, where are the advantages or disadvantages of either? My name is Pete, and I've got an MBA and certified expert in electric vehicles, renewable energy and climate change. If during the talk there are any clarifications, like your clarification, please just shout out, otherwise let's get into in-depth Q&A when we get to the end. Okay? So growing up, in my career, I manufactured bricks. Not a very clean industry. So I was the poster child of anti-climate change. It didn't exist, it was a huge hoax. Any weather that was, if it got too cold in the winter or too hot in the summer, I was like, this kid is like, it's weather, it's not anthropogenic, it's not man-made, it's none of those things. Then there's tide that started to change. It's got really, really serious, which made me look at and started to study what are the physics behind climate change. What do the books say? Not what the internet says, but what do the books say? And one of the fundamental things that stood out was the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. So this is the basis of where climate change comes from. Climate change or greenhouse gases are built upon and measured against your CO2 in the atmosphere. So this is a chart that goes back 10,000 years. When you measure CO2, it's measured in what's called the Keeling curve. So this goes back to 10,000 years. And for the last 10,000 years, the average of parts per million in our atmosphere is 275 parts per million. In fact, this goes back 800,000 years. It's been an average of 275. And this is now from the 1700s. And you can see here, round about the Industrial Revolution, it starts to clock up. And in 1960, it shoots up. So there's something changed. It's changing a tremendous amount. So what scientists believe is that we need to keep that figure below 450. If we were to go 450 parts per million, our temperatures will increase by 2 degrees above pre-industrial area. Now 2 degrees doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're English and you're trying to make tea, the kettle has to boil. You can't make tea in hot water. If you're sick and you've got a normal temperature of 37.6 and you get a temperature of 39.6, you're very sick. So 2 degrees is actually a very, very big deal, can be a huge deal. And if we hit those figures of 2 degrees, we're looking at huge impact on food production. We're looking at a point of no return. We're looking at extreme and deadly weather. The weather that we're getting in Chicago at the moment is climate change. It's extremely cold, or it's extremely hot. That's why global warming is not quite a correct explanation. So climate change is where we look at these days. You're looking at flooding, huge flooding. So if that's what the CO2 levels are supposed to be, who's got a guess of where it is as of Sunday? Anyone for a guess?
About 450.
Well, you're close. We're sitting at 413. In 2015 is when it ticked over 400. So we're in a very sensitive part of our climate. So now to explain on the parts per million, you need to understand that not all CO2 is created equally. You have the CO2 which is above ground, and that's what Mother Nature has been taking care of for the last 800 years. That's what's kept us in the 270 parts per million, where you'll have and how this essentially works is you'll have a hamburger which has got carbon in it. You eat the hamburger, the carbon gets absorbed as energy in our bodies, gets stored as fat. And like at Christmas time, you eat a little bit more, you pick up a bit of weight, and then you've lost a kilo or 2. The only way for that weight, for you to actually lose weight, is to breathe it out. So energy, the carbon cannot go any other way. When you breathe out that carbon, it attaches to oxygen, becomes CO2. That then gets absorbed into the trees and the grass. The cow comes along, eats the grass, carbon goes around in circles, and that's how it's been going for so many years. The problem came in the Industrial Revolution when we started digging up the dead dinosaur juice. All the coal that's been buried for millions of years. Once we've burned that, we've reintroduced that carbon into the atmosphere, and Mother Nature simply cannot absorb that. So you do have a good carbon, and then you have a bad carbon, which is your fossil fuels. So I want to just play a quick video. This is from 1888 or 1880, and this just is about a minute. I'll play it twice, and it will show each country whether it got hotter per year or colder per year. Now, the question is that how do we reduce the CO2 levels that we have at the moment? Well, one of the ideas is that we can do like Genghis Khan and just wipe out enough people that, he reduced our CO2 levels by 700 million tons.
How many people do you need to do that?
Probably quite a lot. Quite a substantial lot. So we could do that, but that's typically frowned upon. So that's where the governments of the world 195 countries came together in 2015 and created what's called the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement essentially makes it legally binding for these 195 countries that we will commit to keeping below the 450 parts per million and below the 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial area. The commitment also goes to divest from all fossil fuels. So essentially any investments that are in fossil fuels at the moment, power generation, that type of thing, will become what's called a stranded asset. It just can't do anything with it. The biggest influence that the government can have to influence the reduction on this is there's a few, but the main two ones are with transport and with energy generation, electricity generation. And under this plan, developed nations will help finance undeveloped nations to the tune of about $100 billion a year to get this in play. With the net goal in 2050 for all countries for Mother Nature to absorb what they put out. So it will be a zero. So it won't be going up. The UK has our plan, or that we put in, is governed by the Committee on Climate Change. And what we committed to do was to lower our CO2 emissions to 80% of what they were in 1990. So in 1990, we were pushing out about 800 million tons of CO2 per year. We committed to bring that down to below 160 million tons a year. We're in the 470 million tons that we're pumping out every year. So we've come a huge way. We reduced it dramatically, which is a phenomenal achievement. Now, one of the ways we're going to do that is through with electric vehicles, and that's governed by what is called the Road to Zero strategy, fossil fuel transportation. And within the Road to Zero, the definition of a low emission vehicle is called ultra low emission vehicle ULEV, and that's going to need to pump out less than 50 grams of CO2 per kilometer at the tailpipe. We committed 5.8 billion to the rollout of this, 400 million going towards EV charging infrastructure, which I think was announced yesterday. 48 million is going to ULEV buses, ultra low emission buses. 246 million to battery technology. There's a huge amount of technology that needs to be developed to make this successful. And 40 million R&D to wireless charging. Wireless charging will be what they call dynamic charging. So when you drive on a motorway, the road will actually connect to the motor car and be able to charge it. As far as our energy generation is concerned, it's interesting if you actually look back. So where we are here, and we're looking back here. So here we do biomass. Biomass is when you burn garden materials. It's in a controlled manner. So garden waste, wood chips, that type of waste. So it creates fire, household trash, that type of thing. 11% is what we use today. Back here, it's not even on the graph. Wind here was 17%, here was 2%. Solar 4%, it doesn't even show here. But the biggest difference is our reduction in coal. Back here we used 31% of our energy generation was created by coal. Here it's 5%. It's a huge reduction. I mean, it's really kudos to where the UK is, what the UK is achieving. If you look at coal, where coal was in 1980, the red one, where that's going, and renewables, the green one, where that's going up. the UK will close all the rest of our 16 coal plants by 2025. If you look at the amount of days that we've run without coal in the UK, before 2015, we ran every single hour, every single minute with coal. We had coal in our mix. Last year, there were 77 days we didn't use coal at all. So as far as the transport is concerned, and the energy, the clean energy is concerned, I mean, it's phenomenal what the country has achieved. On to the differences of EVs. The first commercial EV in my research was actually by an Englishman by the name of Thomas Parker. In 1884, he developed an EV, which is full 2 years before Carl Benz from Mercedes-Benz patented the internal combustion engine in 1886. EVs were nothing new back in the day, but when the internal combustion engine came along, the amount of energy that you could put in a fuel tank within petrol just far outweighed electric, and the batteries just weren't that great, which created a huge phenomenal force for ICE vehicles to go forward. Kind of like what your question was, so what's the difference, you know, what's the main advantage between an EV and an internal combustion? Well, an internal combustion motor car has over 2,000 highly engineered and precision parts. You would know that as well.
It was 2,000,
but over 2,000.
Certainly a lot.
Well, when you take in your gearbox, your transmission, I mean, your engine, it's phenomenal. Your drive shafts and all that type of thing. There is a phenomenal amount of things that need to move. This is a cutaway of a Tesla, has 20 moving parts. This is a photo that Elon sent out on his Twitter of the inside of the drive after Model 3 had done 1 million miles. An EV, it's not unusual for EVs to be able to achieve over 500,000 miles because you simply don't have the moving parts. In fact, Tesla has that you have an 8-year unlimited mileage. Their Tesla semi-truck has going to have an unlimited mileage because you just don't have those things that can break. You wouldn't dream of going out to Car Giant and seeing a car that's got 200,000 miles and go like, yeah, that sounds like a deal. With an EV, you can do that because there's nothing really that can go wrong. If the battery eventually something happens to it, you can simply put in another battery. The rest of the car is mechanically sound. I mentioned I used to manufacture bricks. On the motors for these huge brick making machines were over 400 horsepower, needed 2 on a machine. And those things just ran and ran and ran for, I think the last time it was changed was in 1976. And through dust, because those electric motors just run. They're phenomenal things. Now, question is, but aren't electric vehicles more polluting than petrol? Well, I've got the facts here. So the facts are, on this side, you have an EV. This is currently our current generation of electricity in this country, including coal. By the time, from the power plant, by the time it gets to an EV, that's called well to tank, from the well to the tank. By the time it reaches the tank, it will be 350 grams per kilowatt for it to reach us, to reach the EV. On the other hand, if you've got just a normal petrol, remember that you need a power generation, a plant, to run the oil refinery. You can't just have an oil refinery. You have a power generation plant next to it to run because it's a huge factory. So you have that, and you have the oil refinery. You've got to get all the fuel to the fuel stations, and the well to wheel of an ICE vehicle is at 600 grams per liter. That's before it's been burnt. So 352 per kilowatt, and I know they're different things, that's on the next slide, and 600 grams per litre. So I took a Nissan Leaf, full electric vehicle, and I compared it to a Nissan Duke. With a Nissan Leaf, it's 39 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Once you've added on all this, which is 44 grams, because of the mileage, however long the mileage is, that's what I got to divide it by. With a Nissan Duke, it takes 44 grams of CO2 just to get it into the car. Then you've got to burn it, and a Nissan Duke is burning at 157 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So the Nissan Duke does a total of 201 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So 5 kilometres is a kilo of CO2. Where a Leaf, you're looking at 25 kilometres before it reaches a kilogram. So absolutely the EV is far more superior as far as CO2 is concerned. Other question is, will the grid crash? If everybody gets home at 6 o'clock tonight, will the grid crash? Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The infrastructure just cannot take it. But the question is, why would everybody get home and charge? When we go home tonight, we have 30 million motor cars, 8,500 fuel stations. That's 3,500 cars per fuel station. At 6 o'clock tonight, we don't all go home and on our way home we fill up with petrol. We just don't do that. You've got 200 miles of fuel in your car. You wouldn't stop and top it up. So people generally will not go home and plug in the EV. I know when you have a cell phone, it's what you do. But with an EV, that's not, it's just abnormal behavior. So basically we have, it's not a problem now, but we don't all have EVs now. So we're looking at maybe a 20-year plan. We don't charge every day, some people do. But like you said, you'll be able to charge at work, you'll be able to charge at Tesco, you'll be able to charge at midnight. But we've got very clever people working on the grid to fix those problems, and we've got a long time to fix it up, generally speaking. And renewable energy, that is coming more and more and more and more.
Maybe 30% of the grid at the moment, on a good day.
On a good day. But if you look at,
it was about 30% of the grid on a really good day.
but look at where we come from, I think is where I want to be from. So remember the great, well, you don't remember it, but back in 1884, there was something called the Great Manure Crisis. You had 50,000 horses, 45 horses would die every day, just lie on the street. And the only way you could get rid of those horses is to get another horse to come and drag it away, or you let it rot so it's easier to break it up. I mean, it was a horrible time. 3-year lifespan and 800 tons of manure dropped on London streets every day. It was crazy time. So the point being is that there was bad times and there was a solution. Out of that, we got the internal combustion engine. We got the beautiful Jag, and apparently in 2015 we had flying cars. But now we got a Jaguar I-Pace. So it could be that we're in the great carbon crisis of 2020 at the moment. The point being is that we are going somewhere. Not doing anything is more dangerous than there's a future in this. So takeaway message on this, CO2 we've got to keep below 450 parts per million, 2 degrees below pre-industrial. Fossil fuels are disrupting the CO2 cycle. The Paris Agreement is what governs the CO2 targets around the world. The road to zero has to spend they got a budget of 5.8 billion. Grayling will take care of that, I'm sure. And 20 years to future-proof the grid. That will come naturally. And this is not going away. So how is it that, what can we do? How can you take advantage of the fossil fuel opportunities? It's a new normal. So you can either go with the new normal and try and take advantage of it. Or you can just watch it go past. But there's a lot of advantages and opportunities coming.